So we are here in the Yoko Ono exhibition, a learning garden of freedom that we just opened at Serralves. The exhibition itself is a retrospective exhibition that runs throughout the entire career of Yoko Ono. Just for the context, people, if you don't know Yoko Ono, let me tell you a little bit about her. Yoko Ono is a Japanese-American artist who since the late 1950s, early 1960s, has been one of the most important voices in the world of contemporary art, experimental contemporary art. Her work encompasses many disciplines critically. She had the awareness early on that an artist, a contemporary artist, works between the disciplines. So what you will see in the exhibition are installations, but she deals with painting, sculpture, music, theater, performances. The work itself comes from different traditions and also initiates many traditions that will continue to run throughout the last 60 years now and continue to inspire many artists working today. Among the traditions that Yoko Ono has embraced, or if you build a genealogy in the field of contemporary art throughout the early 21st, from the 21st century to the early 20th century. One of the first, I think, movement we can put in this perspective, in this genealogy, is Dada, Duchamp, Marcel Duchamp. Work that are really going against the grain of conventional art. Movement, artists who deeply questioned what we understood as being art. She also, and we will see that through the exhibition, they are relationship at time with another early movement in the 20th century, which is the surrealist movement, that, if we want to put that in a nutshell, invited us to expand our field of perception and awareness. And we will see that in Yoko Ono's work. Coming from Japan, being trained educated in Japan. There is also in the work appearing here and there the tradition, I would say, of Zen Buddhist thinking. If we continue to look at what the blocks are in the work, we will see that throughout our work, many ideas are feeding the work. First, a kind of defiance, and I mentioned that already, defiance of convention. Through her work, we will see that she's very interested in the notion of freedom and liberation from convention. She's very interested in the environment, and we will see that the elements, air, the sky, water, the sun, the light, are matter in her work. We'll also see that her spirit of defiance, she's a rebel, will also incite her to be part early on in activism. She's an artist and an activist, and her activism will be directed towards women's rights, towards activism against violence made to women, but in a more, I would say, general point of view too, against violence in general, against war, and for peace. If I look at the exhibition, there is almost a chronological development. So here we are in a room that brought together very early work, iconic works from Yoko Ono. So if I look in this room, you might be able to identify through this object some of the ideas that I mentioned early on. I was talking about, for instance, a Zen Buddhist tradition, if I look at this work called pointedness, this sphere, that's an object, that's a sculpture that Yoko Ono created after an experience in meditation. As I said, her work is among other about expanding the field of perception. So this work, which is this crystal glass sphere on a transparent pedestal, comes with a text that says this sphere will be sharp point when it gets to the corners of the room in your mind. A sharp point. There is no sharp point in this object. But through the power of perception, through the power of one mind, this object can become a sharp one, and that she says in the mind. So that's come for me throughout this experience of meditation, an experience and a discipline to perceive the world in an expanded way. And there's many objects like that in this room. If I look at this little silver box here, that also brings together, challenge the power of the mind. You have a little text like on pointedness. It's called the disappearing piece. And you have a little text here, beautiful little poetic text, that says the object in the box will evaporate when exposed to the light. So of course, you have to put your mind at work. You have to first try to figure out whether or not she's telling the truth. You have to trust it. You have to decide whether or not you trust it. What kind of object is eventually in the box? What does it mean that an object will evaporate? And if all of that actually matter. Because the minute you read this sentence, you're faced with something which is so incredibly unusual that it's taking you to another dimension. And that's a way for Yoko Ono, very early on in her work, to get the visitors, the viewers, the public, to participate in the work. And that will be, we will see that in the show, a very important part of her work. She wants the visitors to finish the work with her. She wants the visitor to trust that they can finish the work. The notion of trust is a very important one in her career, in her work. I'll give you another example here. You have this piece here called the danger box. You have two pieces of text in this box of acrylic. And one text says, the management will not guarantee that a hand, when put in this hole, will come out in the same condition as prior to entry. So something will happen or not when I put my hand in this box. You have to trust. So I trust her. I'm gonna put my hand in the box. And yes, something actually happened. I'm not gonna tell you what it is, but my hand is now very different than it was before I put it in the box. A few more things in this historical room of Yoko Ono that are important to capture the way she works. As I mentioned earlier, she was early on very involved in the question of women's rights. And there is a piece here called Object in Three Parts, which is about this topic of women's rights. On this three pedestal, you have three modes of contraception: a sterilet, a condom, and contraception pills. You have to remember that when you look at this piece, that you are in the 60s. And these topics of contraception, of women's rights, of the right of women over their own body, their own sexuality, their own pleasure, was a very taboo and controversial topic. And this notion of the woman body and woman right and taboos will continue to be at the center of her work. There's also a lot of humor in her work. It's playful. And here you have one of the icons of Yoko Ono's work, which is a very simple gesture, as you have a very simple object on a pedestal with the name of this object. It's an apple. It's It's an iconic object because that's one of the early objects that also ended up being controversial. An artist put an apple on a pedestal and decided it was art. So we have to trust the voice of the artist. I mentioned early on the tradition of Dada and the tradition of Marcel Duchamp. Marcel Duchamp is the artist who, of course, decided that his choice, the fact that he decided to name an object as a sculpture, will make this object a work of art. And that's what Yoko Ono does here with the apple. Of course, you look at an apple, and as I say, the audience needs to finish the work. So you bring with you all your understanding of what this object is. What is an apple? Why is that on the pedestal? Of course, if you come from a Christian tradition, a biblical tradition, the apple is at the beginning of the Bible. That's either the fruit of sins or the fruit of knowledge. It's also an object that is going to change. It's going to change during the exhibition because it's subjected to time and we can see it's already changing. So through this very simple object, this very simple gesture, Yoko Ono is bringing the notion of time in the work because in 2 weeks, in 2 days, in 3 months, this object will look very different.